Namaste. I welcome you all to this India Foundation Specials conversation. This is a series of India Foundation where we have discussion with very special individuals. Today we have a discussion on lessons from the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, and we have very eminent speakers to talk about this. Uh, Dr. Swadesh Singh, who is an assistant professor at the University of Delhi, will be moderating the session. I will hand over the proceedings of the seminar to him. Over to you.
Thank you, Aditya ji. So on behalf of India Foundation, I welcome you all in this edition of India Foundation Dialogue. As Aditya ji shared, and we are also saying that the topic today is lessons from the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. What exactly lessons we have learned, and how should we go forward after this Ram Janmabhoomi movement? Because when we are sitting here, so I just read the news that the stones for that Sanctum Sanctorum has been arrived from Rajasthan. And the slogan was that Mandir Vahi Banayenge and Mandir Bhavya Banayenge, and both things are being realized today. So in this background, we are going to have this discussion. So what were the critical responses from the other side, and what are the intellectual learnings we had because of this Ram Janmabhoomi movement? Whether Ram Janmabhoomi has played an important role to raise our collective consciousness, and whether we are able to make an Hindu ecosystem or Hindu vote bank, or whatever you in the terms of Koenraad Elst, that decolonizing Hindu mind. So whether we are successful, whether we are going in the right direction because of this Ram Temple movement, which is considered as second biggest movement after independence movement, which lasted for more than 3 decades. So in this background, we are discussing that what lessons we have learned and how should we go forward with this Ram Janmabhoomi movement. And we have many more to achieve. As you know that Meenakshi ji has written a very beautiful scholarly book on Mathura, Vasudeva Krishna. So we will also hear from her that what exactly are the findings of that book. And Koenraad has done a lot of work on Ayodhya. Even he was the person who made an intellectual foundation for Ram Temple movement in late 80s and early 90s. Ram Janmabhoomi versus Babri Masjid and Ayodhya and after. So these were the works which give intellectual foundation to this Ram Janmabhoomi movement. Even it is being said and mentioned many times by Lalkesh Advani ji that he used to use evidences from his book. So we have these illuminary scholars with us, Koenraad Elst ji. So huge round of applause for Koenraad Elst ji, who is in India since last few weeks. And Meenakshi Jain ji, she was conferred Padam Shri for her scholarly writing. And after that, we are meeting in this physical format. So thank you very much, both of you, for giving us time. And I would like to start with Meenakshi Jain ji to speak on this topic.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here for this talk. For me, this has been a very long journey and a very instructive journey. The most important lesson that I have learned as an individual and as a historian from the Ayodhya movement is the absolute importance of documentation. Though almost 1,000 years have passed since the attacks on our sacred sites and sacred structures began, it is so amazing, so encouraging, and so surprising that we are still today in a position to reconstruct the attacks on our sacred sites and sacred centers and spiritual heritage on the basis of evidence from the medieval period. And I became aware of how much evidence there is despite the passage of time when I started working on my book, Flight of Deities. The first temple in the Indian subcontinent that was destroyed was the Sun Temple at Multan. And the Sun Temple was visited by the Chinese traveler Yun Sang in the 7th century. That is the last eyewitness account that we have of the Sun Temple. Then we know that with the coming of the Arabs, the Murti, the image was destroyed, the temple destroyed, and so we thought that the Hindus have lost political power, and now they have lost their sacred site and sacred heritage. But it was absolutely surprising for me to note that a Moroccan traveler came to Multan in the 12th century, and his account is available to us. It's a contemporary account, not invented by me or any other historian. And that traveler writes an account of his visit to Multan, and he says that the Hindus, the temple is destroyed, the image is destroyed, but they have now brought a wooden image and started worshipping a wooden image. And whenever there is a threat of an invasion or an attack, they run away with that image and they bring it back when the threat goes away. This was an absolute eye-opener for me, and I began to study other foreign travelers who came to Multan up till the 16th century. And the last traveler whose account I was able to access is a Frenchman, Thévenot. He also came and he says this is a wooden image, and the devotees run away with that image whenever there's a threat of an attack. So this was evidence that I was not prepared to face this evidence. Then I started getting curious, and I realized this evidence, this story, is replicated, duplicated in every sacred center in the Indian subcontinent that I could study. And as Swadesh has said that my latest book is on Mathura, I just want to tell you what documentation has shown. For me, as a historian, I did not know any of this until I began working on this book. I have been able to trace the history of a temple at Katra Keshav Dev for 2000 years. It is not something that I have invented. All this evidence that I was able to put together is in the public domain. It has been there for almost 70-80 years. Many excavations were done by British archaeologists, and I just want it will be surprising for you to note that the first evidence that we have of a temple at Katra Keshav Dev is before 15 Common Era. And why do I say it's before 15 Common Era? Because that inscription mentions the name of the ruler whose rule ended in 15 Common Era. So this first inscription from Mathura, from Katra Keshav Dev, is by a person whose name is Vasu, and he says, I'm erecting this structure, and he describes that structure. It has a toran, it has a rectangle in the middle, and the buildings all around. And he says, I'm erecting it for Vasudev. And where am I erecting it? I'm erecting it at the Mahasthan of Vasudev. Now the rest of the inscription is damaged because Mathura was attacked again and again. So no inscription survives fully intact. Most of the inscriptions have not survived. But the little evidence that we have puts together, or we can put together a 100% foolproof case of Hindu claim at Katra Keshav Dev. Now this person, he says, I'm creating this structure at the Mahasthan of Vasudev. Vasudev's name has survived, Mahasthan has survived. The rest of the inscription is not there, so we don't know what he means by Mahasthan. But as people who are aware and conversant with Hindi, Sanskrit, we know that Mahasthan means great place. So what could that great place be? We can speculate. It could be the birthplace of Krishna, or it could be an important event in the life of Krishna, like the killing of Kans. But the fact that this inscription is 2000 years old, it was not found recently, it was found in the early 20th century by British colonial archaeologists. The second instance I want to give is also just a few years after this inscription. It is called the Mora well inscription because it was found in a well. You see, because Mathura was attacked so many times that things have scattered all over. This Mora well inscription says that we are erecting a stone structure for the 5 Vrishni heroes. Now we know that Vasudev was of the Vrishni family, and the 5 Vrishni heroes are he, his elder brother, then Anirudh, this Pradyumna, and Sambha. So it mentions 5 Vrishni heroes, and we are creating this structure for them. This is again 2000 years old. Then, even more astounding, in 1911, Alexander Cunningham carried out excavations at that site. And those excavations, 3 statues were unearthed in the course of those excavations. They were headless, and art historians, the most reputed art historians, recognized art historians who have nothing to do with India, Hinduism, Hindutva, anything, they said that these are the statues of Vasudev and his brother Sankarshan, and the female is their sister. After that, we have many other inscriptions from Mathura, and one I will quote. It is by that Gupta king Chandragupta. And that inscription is in a very bad state. Now it's in the Lahore Museum. It's not in India also. But he says, I am Param Bhagvat. So, great devotee. So, this evidence, I have not quoted all the inscriptions, but there is substantial evidence of a temple at that site. So, I am convinced of the importance of documentation. Just one more thing before my time gets up. You see, there is a scholar, about 50 years ago, he carried out research when were plays staged in Mathura. Plays, Natak, on the life of Krishna. And again, it is very surprising that he found a fragment of an inscription. It was an inscription of a family of actors. So this family of actors, they are professional actors, and by actors I mean they can sing and they can dance. And they say they perform on the life of the 2 brothers. So this kind of evidence is absolutely there. How much time do you have? 5 minutes? Okay. So now moving aside from this documentation, because we are concerned about what happened to the sacred heritage of ours in the medieval period. We know that Mahmud Ghaznavi came. He was the first person to absolutely ransack Mathura and create havoc. There was nothing left. But his court historian, who came with him, described the grandeur of the buildings at Mathura. And he says, we were stunned when we saw these buildings. They were so, it was amazing that human hands could have made these buildings. They were so extraordinary. But we know that Mahmud Ghaznavi destroyed the temples. Now, again, the importance of inscriptions. 100 years after Mahmud's destruction at Mathura, we don't know what happens in that 100 years at all. But 100 years later, there is a small fragment of an inscription. It is by a person called Jhajja. We don't know of Jhajja from any other source. If this inscription had not survived, we would not even have known that there was a Jhajja. And this Jhajja says, I am rebuilding the Krishna temple. So can you imagine how steeped in the spiritual, cultural heritage of India every person was, that they remembered that this temple had been destroyed, and they thought that it is their duty whenever they can to reconstruct that temple. When I say reconstruct that temple, obviously it was not a grand temple, because political power was not in the hands of the people of the subcontinent. They were not that economically prosperous that they could. But that memory that we had a temple here, which should be reconstructed, is evident in this small inscription. We would not have known of the reconstruction of this temple by a small person whom we don't know of in any other way. So this is the importance of documentation. Then the temple, again and again, the destruction of the temple, there's no need to go into it. But in the time of Akbar, we have this Portuguese who comes to India and visits Mathura. His name is Father Montserrat. And he writes a book and he says, I went to Mathura. All the temples are destroyed except this one temple. So what happens to that temple we don't know, but we know that in the reign of Jahangir, Bir Singh Bundela built this grand temple. It was a temple that we have eyewitness accounts of Meenakshi Jain, who came to India, visited this temple and wrote detailed accounts of the grandeur of this temple and the importance of this temple. This temple was destroyed on the orders of Aurangzeb. Again, we have the documentation. It is by Saki Mustaid Khan, who was an eyewitness, and an Italian visitor, Meenakshi. Both were eyewitnesses to the destruction of this temple, and that is also recorded. This documentation, you know, it is so remarkable that we should, I don't want to continue with the story because I'll keep that for the second round. I am just stopping here with the destruction of the temple of Mathura by Aurangzeb, just to emphasize the fact that no conscious effort has been made to recover all these elements. But it's very important for the Hindu cultural regeneration and for the society to come to accept what happened to it in the past, to record these facts, because that is the process of cleansing our souls and getting confident to march ahead. So what happens after Aurangzeb, if you are interested, I will say after Koenraad has finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Means for an academics like you, scholar like you, definitely footnotes, references, and this documentation are very much important. Even in politics, we used to say कि footnote बनना है क्या, but you can understand that how much important these footnotes are, how much important these references are. Means parliament is as much important our bookshelf are. I used to say कि सफदर हाशमी मार्ग भी उतना ही important है जितना parliament होती है. So capture that space also, and that you have done in last 3 decades very beautifully, ma'am. Thank you very much. So, and to awaken a nation, these footnotes, these references, these bookshelves, we have to capture, and this is one of the learnings which we can have from her. Means I have got opportunity to review her 4 or 5 books: Battle for Ayodhya, Rama and Ayodhya, Flight of Deities. On Sati, she has done a very good work on Sati also. And the latest book, I also got opportunity to review this Vasudev Krishna. And as she told us that how beautifully with evidences and all she has written that book, and that will definitely become again a document for in court for our next battle for Mathura. So for this with this note, I would like to invite Koenraad Elst ji to share his views. Koenraad ji.
Well, I hear that from you now that effectively you are planning a battle for Mathura. I suppose Kashi cannot be far off.
I only write books.
Okay. So, in fact, when L.K. Advani presented Sitaram Goel's book about the list of destroyed temples, he also said that he would try to prevail upon the Vishwa Hindu Parishad to drop the demand for these 2 other places and just restrict it to Ayodhya, which now that the temple is being built, ought to like finish the whole temple destruction and reconstruction business. So it is news already. You've not come for nothing that you people are pursuing the next 2 temples, and who knows how many after that. Okay, I've like just a few days ago been in Varanasi and seen the new Kashi thing. So locals tell me that it's a bit controversial because many interesting temples have also been leveled together with the houses that were standing there, which is interesting, not so much for the possible political fallout, but for the fact that this confirms one of the theses of Meenakshi, namely that people try to keep on worshipping their gods in the form of murtis in temples as close to the proper place as possible. And so there were a number of temples that have now been destroyed that were built into houses that from the outside only look like houses. And so even under people like Aurangzeb, you see, worship could continue like that. Well, so what you do with this, I have really no position on. I said since the beginning, well, you know, ultimately these temples are perhaps interesting as a symbol, as a sign of Hindu revival. But ultimately, that's not the solution. The real solution is that you do not just bring the temples back, you bring the Muslims back. Because after all, they are your own countrymen, same DNA. And, you know, they've been estranged from their ancestral civilization, and there is no reason in the world why that should be, you know, why that should remain like this. So that's my last word about the issue of, you know, next temple revivals or temple restorations. Now, I would like to correct you a little bit on your laudatory introduction. I did not have much to do with the start of the intellectual debate, in the sense that a number of people were already collecting evidence, like the archaeological evidence of Bibi Lal, like and of S.P. Gupta, the documentary evidence presented by Harsh Narayan, by Abhas Kumar Chatterjee, by Arun Shauri. So, I mean, my role at that time was mostly to string the evidence together in a coherent narrative, which narrative remains quite important, because what it ultimately says, and what has been demonstrated so masterfully by Sitaram Goel, is that there is a plan, a project, a theology behind all these temple destructions. And so even where there are holes in the evidence, the whole narrative makes clear what has happened. Like, for instance, we know of a great many cases of temple destruction. Like, we know of 8 different successive times when the Somnath temple was destroyed. In the case of Ayodhya, precisely, we are less certain. And so, you see, I don't want to bore you by all the time being in agreement with Dr. Jain. So here's one thing that we tend to disagree on. That is, what happened before there was a Babri Masjid there? Indeed, is it a Babri Masjid at all? You see, even in the Supreme Court judgment, it is pointed out that actually, you know, by standards of real historical proof, we haven't really proven that Babar did this. Or even his lieutenant, Mir Baki. We used to have an inscription on the gate of the Babri Masjid saying that this had been built by Mir Baki. But even that is not proof in the strict sense. That's a claim. That's hearsay. And so very strictly we don't know. You know, even Babar's diary disappoints us. You see, it has these crucial pages missing. So we don't have a real testimony. That inscription can be from 100 years later, or it may have been a lie since the very beginning, a very deliberate lie, attributing it to someone else than the one whom the writer knew to be the real builder. Who knows? So I think that because of the whole narrative, this is not important. You see, what we do know for sure is that whatever structure existed before was destroyed by Islamic iconoclasm. And so when this actually happened, I am not too pleased with the VHP narrative about this, namely that this happened by Babar, 1526 thereabouts, 1528, and that is very unlikely, because that means that all through the Sultanate period there was this huge Hindu temple, one of the main sites of pilgrimage of Hinduism, standing there almost in front of a Sultanate governor's house, where there were troops stationed. And so they went all the way to Assam and destroying every temple, every sacred building they could find on the way, all the temples in Varanasi, the Buddhist universities and so on. Everything was destroyed. And yet, just in front of them, they left this big temple standing for 3 centuries. You see, that's like very unlikely. So what I think happened is that that big temple, well, there were 2 successive temples. There was one that was destroyed by Salar Masud Ghaznavi in 1030. So that temple has been found, and then a much bigger temple was rebuilt later that century. And that temple was then destroyed. And it's of that one that we have the pillar bases and so on. So it has been absolutely proven, if proof was needed, that this temple existed. But when was it destroyed? Well, you see, I am pretty sure that it was destroyed together with all these other temples in 1192, 1194. Then what happened after that? Well, actually, in spite of all our research, we don't really know. So there must have been a Muslim presence at the site, which may have been interrupted around the time of the fall of the Delhi Sultanate. So what may have happened then is that the Hindus reasserted their presence at the site, because they always kept trying. They were always, as you have wonderfully shown, you know, they always kept coming as close as they could. So when they had a chance, they reasserted their presence there. And there were probably not the circumstances to build a real temple there. It may have been the situation that actually existed between 1949 and 1992, namely that you had a Muslim building used for Hindu worship. And so it is that Hindu presence that was then again destroyed, probably by Babar. So you could say, in a manner of speaking, that he destroyed a temple, or at least something that functioned as a temple. And even that, you see, that's only likely, that's not strictly proven. And then you get Akbar, who again allows Hindus to rebuild their temples. So when we get a first testimony about Ayodhya from, I think, 1605, William Finch, he describes a Hindu presence there, which is very likely. You see that Akbar or his successor even perhaps vacated the site, or at least, you see, left Hindus free to use it. Right? And then we get Aurangzeb, who then reasserts the Islamic presence. And so when Tiefenthaler in 1767 doubts a bit whether it was Babar or Aurangzeb, that may indeed refer to a negative role that Aurangzeb played at the site, as at many others. So, you see, I'm very sure, don't worry, that this really was a case of Islamic iconoclasm, that Hindus deserve to take the site back. But actually, in comparison to all the work so many scholars have done, there are still holes in the narrative. Okay, so that's for the historical evidence. Of course, this is when you look at it from like some date in the future, it will look very funny because so many people have worked so hard to prove something that in fact was never in doubt. You see, when there was a trial about the site in 1885, then all the parties concerned, including the Muslims, accepted, yes, of course, there was a Hindu temple there, and after its destruction, a mosque was built. And so that was never in doubt. The British judge accepted this. He only concluded, well, yeah, okay, it's unjust, but since it's long ago, let's not upset the status quo. And so that remained the case until the 1980s. And if it hadn't been for the eminent historians who turned this into a very big thing, the mecca of secularism, the last, absolutely last resort to defend secular India against Hindu barbarism, then you see this could have been settled in a rather, ordinary way. That's what Rajiv Gandhi, as Prime Minister at the time, had in mind. Some Congressite horse trading, you see, by the Muslim leadership off with some little sweeteners like the Shah Bano judgment or the satanic verses censorship, and then leave the site to the Hindus. And he was rather clear on this, as by sending his Home Minister Bhuta Singh to the Shilanyas ceremony. He also said, just like his successor Narasingha Rao also did, this controversy should be settled on the basis of the historical evidence whether there was a temple there. Now, that's a diplomatic way of saying, of course we will have a temple there because everybody knows what the historical evidence really amounts to. So, in spite of his rather strange genesis, it was, let's say, fun to have this historical research, especially because it ended so well. The eminent historians, as they called themselves or one another, have had a lot of egg on their faces. And so now those who still survive systematically look the other way. Though there is a new generation of secularists, of people in frontline and so on, who still try to somehow pass the message that actually it's not so sure. But to really go out and say, you see, no, there was no temple there, I don't think anyone dares to do that at the moment. So in terms of proving a point, I think that our side has come out rather satisfactorily. So now the rest of the story is about what's going to happen to the temple. Like, for example, if I were the Home Minister, I'd be concerned about the security. This is a absolutely beautiful target for the terrorists. So whenever anything happens that they don't like, this is a very telling way to give a voice to that. Then I'd like to end on this. I'd like to warn you that something ominous has happened. So I'm very glad that today so many good things have happened, but nevertheless, this starting ceremony last year on the 5th of August. Okay, now as I learned through the Indian media, I don't follow such things so much. That was on an astrologically negative moment. So, I mean, I don't know anything about Hindu astrology, but there are certain things so simple that even I understand. So, if you start an undertaking, you should preferably do it on the waxing moon. So you still have plenty of choice. That's half the days of a year satisfy that condition. And effectively, the astrologers had suggested a number of different dates, but nothing doing. The government insisted that it be on the 5th of August, which happened to be the second anniversary of Modi's spectacular abolition of Article 370. Now, I think that the use of anniversaries as a guide for when to do things is not so fortunate. We have another example, very famous example. The independence of India was on 15th of August 1947. That was also because of an anniversary. So you see, political thinkers and so on, they suggested sometime in 1948 so that it could be properly prepared, and people crossing over between India and Pakistan peacefully and so on. So that was decided against, with the consequences you know. And Mountbatten was in a hurry. Why? Well, because of an anniversary. You see, he did it on, again, the second anniversary of the capitulation of Japan in the hands of Douglas MacArthur and Lord Mountbatten. And so he wanted to celebrate that, and thereby he imposed on India a horoscope that the local astrologers tell me explains all the misery that has befallen India ever since. So something similar might happen to the Ayodhya temple, but nevertheless it won't be our doing. Thank you.
You have definitely warned us, and we are also very cautious with these developments, and we are definitely witness many developments in coming future also. So the house is open, but being moderator, let me grab the opportunity to ask a couple of questions from our esteemed panelists. So my first question to you with ma'am, because you are from academics, you have taught in Delhi University since long, and ma'am is currently senior fellow with Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. So ma'am, means I'm a student of political science, and we always study about history of politics, but what should we learn from politics of history? Means you proved the same thing, and there were historians collective, as you mentioned, that eminent historian, a subaltern collective was there from JNU, and different part of the world professors were involved, and they were not able to prove, or they wanted to prove something else from this Ram Temple movement. So why they were doing that? Because even today these university campuses are autonomous, and the historians are very much there, and they are also coming up with their writings based on evidences only. So how should the next generation will take it forward, ma'am?
You see, as far as I can understand, the Hindus won the case in Ayodhya because of documentation. The Supreme Court or the High Court of Allahabad would not have entertained the Hindu point of view unless there was no other evidence. Whoever destroyed the temple, whether it was Babur or somebody else, it was destroyed in 1528. When the Allahabad High Court began the hearings, it asked the Masjid party, where were you from 1528 till 1858? Because the year 1858 is when we first hear a Muslim voice from that site. So for 300 years, you are not able to produce a shred of evidence that you were there. It leads us to imagine that it was a case of smash and grab. Whoever destroyed that temple, destroyed it and quickly erected a structure to occupy that space. That space had value only because it was a sacred space of the Hindus. It had no meaning for the invader, whoever it was. So for 300 years, your intention was just to deny the worshippers access to that site. This story of smash and grab has been there in most sites, for example, Kashi, Mathura, etc. What I'm saying is that this case at Ayodhya, as Koenraad says, that the evidence was not very conclusive on many points. But the courts gave the decision in favor of the Hindus because of the other party not having any evidence to prove their case. In fact, the first evidence that we have of a Muslim voice from Ayodhya is in 1858, when the Mutawalli of that masjid files a case in the Faizabad district court. And he says that, these Hindus have entered and they've written Ram Ram all over the walls and they started Havan and Puja. And how does he sign that appeal to the British? He says, I am the superintendent of Masjid e Janamsthan. So he himself is acknowledging that it is because nowhere in the world you find a masjid named Janamsthan Masjid. But what has masjid got to do with Janamsthan? So this is the point, that the evidence was so much, but because it was inconclusive and because our Hindu side was not so well organized at that time, that they controlled the media. The media went on blowing up every evidence that they gave, which was all false. It was not found to be this thing. But the Hindu side did not get that much space in the media. Since the Ayodhya, the whole scenario has changed. Social media has played a very important role in empowering the Hindus and breaking the stranglehold of historians, eminent or not so eminent. And what I can say on the basis of my study at Mathura, no historian of any hue can challenge or reject this vast amount of evidence that I have produced. It's a question of documentation. How will you say that this inscription is not there? All these inscriptions were found, deciphered and published in the Epigraphica Indica well before independence. So no Hindutva historian is involved in interpreting, finding or writing about them. So I think that it's a very, very positive role ahead, in spite of your warnings and cautionary tone. I think that we're on a very confident and strong note. And can you imagine, there is not one so-called eminent voice who has commented on my book? I mean, they should have lambasted the book and said this is all, creating trouble and all false evidence. Not a word.
Yes. So you cannot see in the broadsheets that a review of her book even today means when we say that ecosystem is in our favor. So, sir, my question here goes to Koenraad, sir. So I think that his book, Decolonizing the Hindu Mind, Ideological Development, Hindu Revivalism, should be reread in this new scenario. And my question is to you, sir, that means what's your take on this Ram Janmabhoomi movement in creating a Hindu public sphere or Hindu ecosystem, whether we have succeeded and how should we go forward?
Well, of course I can praise it and so on, and generally I would, but it's more interesting to go into the trouble spots, namely, you see, after the killing by Mulayam Singh Yadav of some Hindu activists, I visited the family of the Kothari brothers that had been shot. And, what can you say? I mean, you can utter condolences and so on, but, I mean, that, you absolutely can't make up for the loss. And so, when I looked in these, in this mother's eyes, I thought, if only there was a way to undo this. And so I thought, not that it will make any difference for them, but we ought to do the exercise of thinking up a way, if at any rate we can find one, to achieve the same thing but more bloodlessly. And so, to quite an extent, this could have happened. You see, in fact, it was going well. Under Rajiv Gandhi, it was going well. I mean, You see, the poor man may have been guilty of fathering Rahul and Priyanka, but but he did a few good things too. And so, you know, leaving it to him, perhaps the issue would have been solved. It's not necessary. I mean, buying off the Muslim leadership might still not have worked, because of course it's a spur to the second level, the second rank leadership to then assert themselves and accuse the leaders of betraying the Muslim cause or whatever. So it's not sure that it would have worked, at least it was worth a try. And you see, then it was sabotaged by two totally different developments. One was the eminent historians who queered the pitch enormously, you know, aided by Dilip Patgaonkar and Frontline and so on. But so it's essentially, I mean, the initiative is clearly with the eminent historians. And so for BJP people at the time, that didn't make a difference yet. Today they're secular. Back then they were still Hindutva. But for Congress politicians, this made it very uncomfortable to pursue the temple as they originally had. And so then the second development is, of course, the bid by the BJP to monopolize the issue. And so then you get the conflict scenario that we've had in the early 90s. So we don't know exactly what we compare with, because we don't know how the Rajiv Gandhi scenario would have played out in the long run. But possibly, you see, this rather bloody scenario could have been averted. Yeah, so that's one critical remark I have of this movement. The second one is that the reason why all this has happened and why we now have to conduct such a movement, that has been blurred. It's not entirely denied, but not properly emphasized, at least. As Sitaram Goel had shown in detail, you see, this all emanated from a theology of iconoclasm. And so this has rarely been articulated. People have tried to avoid facing that stark fact. Because of course you have this many Muslims in your country, as K.R. Malkani of the BJP used to say, yeah, but we have to live with them. I was present at a conversation where he said that to Mr. Goel, who then replied, well, you see, what I'm concerned with is seeing that they learn to live with us. So, you know, because of this difficulty of how to deal with the really existing Muslims around you, the BJP politicians shied away from just stating the facts of iconoclasm. And so they went around it like the famous phrase, I've used it many times, but I'll point to it once more. They used to say, yeah, you see, this is a struggle against the Indian hero Rama and the foreign invader Babar. No, that was a misstatement. You see, so many foreigners have come into India. You see, the Greeks have come into India. And so Apollodorus, did he destroy temples? No, he built the pillar of Apollodorus for Krishna somewhere in Sanchi. Or Menander, another Indo-Greek king. Yeah, right, sorry. And Menander, he became a Buddhist. There's a famous Buddhist text by him, Milinda Panya. So it's not true that foreigners destroy temples. You see, the Scythians have come and the Kushanas have come and so on. The British have come. They even revived many temples. They rediscovered Sanskrit texts and so on and so on. So they destroyed plenty economically, educationally, but they also did a number of good things for the Hindu religion. And so if Babar did this, it is not because he was foreign. It was for some other reason that perhaps people have difficulty articulating.
Thank you, Marisa. So then the house is open, so you can ask your questions. Okay, yep. Preetam Banerjee ji.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I have a very quick question. As one of the lessons from for both the panelists. So when I was a student in 9th and 10th standard, when we were taught about temples in our school system, they were taught in a very boring manner. You know, we were taught that the Gopuram is X height and the Torana is made of such and such stone. The spirituality and also this entire struggle, you know, where an entire community has struggled over and over again to preserve their culture, was never taught in our history books. So when I think about what has happened in the last few years and how we have been able to come up with this alternative narrative, for me a primary concern is twofold. One, how do we get this story across to our younger children in the school books in a way that is far more engaging, because I found that very boring to read about, you know, a 10 feet Toran and a 50 feet Gopuram. The second point is, you know, the preservation of what we have and further on. And there I think this entire issue of state control of our temples is, I think, a tremendous movement that we need to, you know, a battle that we need to wage. So I would like to hear your views on both these topics. Thank you.
Well, I noticed that the enemy side has adapted quite well to the new situation. So right now it won't wash anymore to simply deny the temple destructions. So they are very good at minimizing them and relativizing them, and essentially saying that the Hindus are just as guilty in a number of manners. There are a number of cases where after Buddhists were exterminated, Hindus took over Buddhist temples, just as Buddhists have often taken over non-Buddhist temples, like the one in Cambodia. Okay, but so these are then presented as, look, this is the same thing. This is what Muslims did to Hindus. Hindus shouldn't complain because they themselves did it. No, this is not the same thing at all. Another thing that they play up, and so in the school books it's mentioned, and it is given more space than the far larger phenomenon of Muslim temple destruction, is the abduction of idols. This is a practice that existed all over the pagan world. In Mesopotamia, you regularly hear of Sumerians stealing an Akkadian idol and vice versa. So there are a few cases. There is some book of which I don't even... okay, so Salman Khurshid, Sunrise over Ayodhya. That's a rather positive title, but in fact it tries to save the eminent historian's case as much as possible. And so it says there are innumerable cases of Hindus stealing idols. And so this is the same thing. In fact, if Muslims destroy temples, it is only a continuation of an established Hindu practice. And so this was said by Richard Eaton. He's the one who launched it in about 1999. I wrote a reply to it, which is in my book, Ayodhya, the Case Against the Temple, which is a strange title because it looks like it is as if it is against the temple. In fact, what it highlights is that the other side has always been fulminating against the temple, but since there was a historical debate, you would expect them to give arguments for their case. They never have. There is no such thing as a debate. There are Hindus who, take the trouble of finding evidence, and the other side is saying, oh no, this doesn't satisfy us. This is not good, more evidence. And so that was the situation. So their side didn't bring any evidence. Okay, so you see, I highlighted the situation of the debate, and so part of that was this new approach pioneered by the self-described Marxist historian Richard Eaton, saying that, you see, Hindus have done this all along. No, this is not true. First of all, it is not true that Muslim temple destroyers based themselves on any Hindu example. Well, why would they? If they want to destroy Hinduism, they're certainly not going to seek justification from Hinduism. And anyway, I mean, we have so many of their writings, you see, you can't find this anywhere. What you do find many times is that they justify their behavior by citing the example of earlier Islamic conquerors, or most of all of Muhammad himself. And especially Muhammad taking over the Kaaba, where 360 murtis were destroyed. So it had nothing to do with Hindu example, and then it is also simply not true. So they say there are innumerable cases, and then what follows is always the same 3-4 examples. So they don't have many more, but they call it innumerable. Now, what do these amount to? Well, you, like for instance, the Cholas, I think, one of the Tamil dynasties, conquers Sri Lanka. And so in Anuradhapura, they take one of the Buddha statues and take it home. Now, they don't do anything to Buddhism. Buddhism persists. The locals are perfectly free to install a new image of Buddha, to continue worshipping the Buddha, and so on. So what Muslims do is something very different. It's not the prestige of an idol that they are going to continue to worship. No, on the contrary. You see, in the Hindu case, a deity continues to be worshipped, but at a different location. And even at the original location, the deity can also continue to be worshipped, but with a different murti. Whereas what Muslims do is to destroy a religion, or at least attempt to. Now, this is entirely typical for secularism. When secularists talk about any religious subject, it is absolutely crassly superficial. You see, the two phenomena have a certain visual resemblance, but they are very different phenomena. Okay.
I just want to add one or two points to what Koenraad has said. You see, in India, the dominant thing was that there was a common sacred tradition. And this instances that have been cited about image appropriation. In 99.9% of the cases that I have examined, the ruler who invaded a kingdom brought back with him the most revered image from that kingdom and created a temple in his kingdom for the veneration of that image. So, and this tradition, actually the first recorded case is in the Hathi Gumpha inscription in Orissa. It is of the 2nd century BC. So there is this ruler of Orissa, Kharvel is his name. He writes in this inscription that, this king from Magad came to my kingdom and took away this revered image of Jinnah. Jinnah, we presume, is a Jain Tirthankar who was born in that region. And he writes in this inscription, I have taken my army to Magad, marched into his palace, and I'm proud to record that I brought back that image. So this is the story. Krishna Deva Raya, we all know of Krishna Deva Raya. Krishna Deva Raya attacked Orissa. There are so many examples, I'm just giving one or two examples. He attacked Orissa. There was a revered image of Krishna. So he did not destroy that temple where the image was kept. He brought back that image. And in Hampi, which was his capital, he reinstated that image with all due honors in the Krishna temple there. That Krishna temple is still standing, And how do we know? Because that inscription that Krishnadeva Raya engraved on the walls of that temple, he says, I have bought him from Orissa and I have stated him with honors. In Khajuraho, there is an image, the king, he traces how that image changed hands with 6 rulers. The vacant Vishnu image, that inscription on that temple says that 6 rulers possessed this image before this king of Khajuraho, he got it and he instated it in this temple. So it is an entire, there are only 2 instances which I have cited in my book. I don't want to get into that, but it is, as Koenraad says, an attempt to whitewash Islamic iconoclasm by creating this counter that Hindus were always doing it. Hindus were never doing it.
Thank you. Thank you for your responses. Yeah.
Dr. Elst, I'm sure you've gone through the Ayodhya judgment. Judgment, on the one hand, has actually created a precedent that if there is evidence of existing religious structure and some other religion has taken it over, then there is a case for the earlier religion to reclaim it back. But then the same judgment says you cannot use this as a precedent in any other temples, any other case going forward. That would essentially negate Mathura and Kashi, if at all, if and when they come up. So what's your view on that, and what do you think the Hindus should be doing to do this? I mean, are we completely at the sole mercy of a government to go and bring in an enactment, or is there something else we can do?
Well, it doesn't carry much weight if the judges say that this judgment can't be used as a precedent. I mean, that's not binding on the next generation, I think. So obviously the fact that they have come to that judgment, that carries more weight. But, okay, let me first say this about the judgment. Many people have said, both the foreign press and probably also the secularist press in India, but also some devotees of the BJP, they have said, oh, this judgment in favor of the Hindu case in Ayodhya could never have come about but for the BJP being in power. Now, that's a very serious indictment of the Indian judiciary system, or of the rule of law, of the separation of powers in India. You see, to say, oh yeah, the judges did that only to please the government that is now there. I don't think so. I mean, at least I hope not. And so a strong argument, I think, is that the really decisive judgment that has been confirmed now by the Supreme Court is the one by the Uttar Pradesh High Court in 2010, when there was no BJP government, neither in UP nor at the center. So that was a show of the independence of the judiciary. All right? So I don't think that what government we have in power was all that decisive. Now, that's not really an answer to your question. Frankly, I have never thought of, you see, how this is going to work out in the future, because indeed it is quite likely that now court cases are going to come up over Mathura and Kashi, not necessarily these riotous movements, but yes, in court it will be fought over, and so there I think this judgment is going to have precedent value no matter what they say.
Yeah, and yeah, sure. And ma'am, I just also wanted to ask.
But I want to
sure.
add something, a ray of hope. One thing is that in 2021, the Supreme Court has said that it is willing to re-examine the Places of Worship Act of 1991, because one person petitioned the court that you're discriminating against Jains and Buddhists who have also lost. You're only saying that Ayodhya is going to be exempt. But since I'm talking about Mathura, and I want to give you a tremendous ray of hope. You see, when was this Eidgah at Mathura built? All right. The Places of Worship Act says if anything is built after 1947, we cannot change the character of that place. But it is a surprise, I think it will be a surprise to all of you, that in 1968, there was a body that suddenly came up called the Krishna Janmabhoomi Seva Sangh. Now, what this Seva Sangh was, who made it, it's all very hazy. But in 1968, this Seva Sangh, a dubious organization, acted on behalf of Katra Keshav Dev, the trust that was created by Jugal Kishore Birla, and out of the blue, it handed over 3 acres of Katra Keshav Dev to Eidgah Party. Now, Eidgah Party, from the time that the British court hearings began, it had lost every case in the British courts. And the British courts had said Katra Keshav Dev is one unit. It has never been partitioned or divided. And the heirs of Raja Patnimal, who bought that thing in 1815, they handed it over to Jugal Kishore Birla in 1944. So 1951, Jugal Kishore Birla created a trust, Sri Krishna Janamsthan, Sri Krishna Janamsthan, whatever it was, to create a great temple for Krishna. Entire 13.37 acres was given to this trust to create a temple for Krishna. Now, the trust does nothing for whatever reasons, and in 1968, another dubious body comes up and it signs an agreement with the Eidgah Party and gives 3 acres of land to Eidgah. My question is, where is that 3 acres of land? Does the present Eidgah stand on those 3 acres which was given to it in 1968? If it does, then the People's Worship Act of 1991 does not apply to it. So, this is a question that has now to be addressed and answered, because that agreement of 1968 is so specific, it's available in the public domain, and that specifies इतना ज़मीन यहाँ से देनी है, इतनी ज़मीन यहाँ से देंगे, इतनी ज़मीन. The area that has to be handed over to the Eidgah Party is specified. So there is no debate that area of the Katra Keshav Dev was handed. इसमें तो कोई debate ही नहीं है. Now the thing is that why did a government feel compelled to probably push this agreement? Because, as I said, Eidgah had won no case ever in any court from 1815 onwards, when the East India Company arrives on that scene. I am saying this with due caution. This is just my hunch. Hunch is that in 1968, the government at the center was a minority government. I am not specifying the government, you can easily check. Now that minority government needed support from outside parties to survive in power. So it got support from 2 groups. One was the Muslim League, so we can understand why 3 acres were given to the Eidgah Party. And the other was the communists, who later on dominated our education system. So, as a student of history, I feel appalled at the attacks on my culture, civilization, heritage, 1,000 years. But I take courage and inspiration and hope from the ordinary people whom we don't even know their names, who sacrificed and showed the courage to protect their murtis, deities, etc. And on the other hand, I find Hindus in independent India so thirsty for power that they can hand over something which my ancestors fought for. But I'm saying this is my hunch, that this agreement happened in 1968 because of a minority government. Now the thing is that the Mathura District Court has begun hearings. Many of these things which were kept a secret, this 1968 agreement, how many of us knew about it? I did not know. So many of these closely guarded secrets of dirty politicians, they will perhaps come is open now.
Wonderful, ma'am.
Thank you.
I just had one more question to her, if I can. I'll just ask a question. Thing is, while we speak about the 1991 Places of Worship Act, I don't think we have spoken enough about the Archaeology Act on which governs the archaeology. See, today you can't revive any temple, not just because of the 91 Act, but because once an archaeological monument is taken over by the department, I mean, you'll have in Hazara Rama temple in Hampi, you can walk in shoes inside the Garbhalaya. In Martand temple, you can walk in shoes. They are not allowing it. That's an area where, as a historian, probably if you could, produce some material to say that we need to change this act, that will probably help.
Yeah, Satyam, you have a question. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. So my question is very crisp, and ma'am and sir, you have done your job and you have enlightened us of our own past. My question is, what can we do, someone who is a common man, someone who is not that proficient with the history of India, what can be done by a common man with regards to our own culture, which dates back to thousands of years? What can be done about that? It's a question for both of you. Thank you.
Well, the first thing, of course, is to keep it alive or to revive it wherever you have forgotten. And I mean, the new generations are indeed busy forgetting, are becoming less and less Hindu. I sometimes wonder if a movement like the one that happened 32 years ago about Ayodhya would still even be possible now. I mean, I don't know. You see, I do not have my pulse, my finger on the pulse of Indian public opinion, but I have the impression that successive generations are becoming less Hindu, are becoming less motivated for Hindu causes. So, I mean, just what do people fill their heads with? You know, when you lived in a village long ago, you had nothing else except Havan and Agnihotra and so on. And now they fill their heads with American rock music and, Bollywood movies full of, Urdu and anti-Hindu propaganda and so on. And so that, this you have to give the enemy, that they know what they're doing and that to some extent they also succeed. So, their job is mainly to estrange Hindus from Hinduism. That's, for instance, the approach of the Christian education system. You see, openly going against Hinduism, that is too risky. That would wake sleeping dogs. But to estrange the pupils from Hinduism, now that is working very fine. So that's the very first thing that everybody should do, is to really re-root himself in this civilizational heritage.
So, Nina Rai, you can also briefly tell us about your book.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Before I tell everybody about my book, I'd like to answer the questions of both the gentlemen that you raised, in addition to what the eminent speakers just said. One of the things that Hindus have failed at is recognizing genocide, the signs of genocide and the types of genocides that have occurred on us. And unless we grieve for what has happened to us, we will not get freedom from what is entrenching us. We will not get freedom to do the things that we wish to do. So I'm going to give you just some, because you said about the laws are restrictive. And you said, what can we do? I'm going to answer them. I'm going to tell you why the laws are restrictive. So the work that I'm going to quote right now is work on genocide done by Rajat Mitra. And he said there were 3 ways, and there are actually 4-5 ways. He mentioned 3 specific ways, wherein genocide was conducted on Hindus. The first way was to contain them, to have to contain people. In this, you encircle the Hindu civilization and the people through laws and rules. What were these laws and what were these rules? these laws were that if a temple is broken, it will not be rebuilt again. Exactly the same as the ASI law that is being followed now. This is the first pattern of genocide. The second thing is they came out with new rules. What were these new rules? The new rules stated that the height of a temple thereafter being built, even with permission, will not exceed a particular level. So that is why in India you do not see, North India you do not see temples with very high gopurams or temples which are very, very tall. Okay, so these are laws that constricted Hindus. Now, this was done. This started with the Islamic invasions after the 7th century. When the British left, how did they contain India? How did they contain the Hindus? They divided the country in 3 parts. On one side you had Pakistan, and on the other side also you had Pakistan. So now do you understand how Hindus have been contained for many, many years? So one of the things that if we need to break out of this cycle is that we need to challenge these laws and reenact new laws. That means new people will have to come forward and take over these laws or challenge them and change these laws. The second thing that they did was to destroy our centers of learning. This is the second process of genocide. So when you said, now what do we do? What does the new generation do? So this is something maybe you could do or you could think of. One of the things that the Muslims did is that they believed that if there was any book to read, it was the Quran, and no other book should be there. So that's why they destroyed the visual centers of learning. So all the great universities which are big and mighty, and at that time only India had these kind of centers of learning. So they were destroyed. They did not pay attention to the Gurukuls, which was the root of our learning. Okay, so this is the reason why the Hindus are, you're saying that the new Hindu generation. And when the British came, they destroyed the Gurukul system. They understood its importance, and then they destroyed it and replaced it with their system, right? So we don't have Gurukuls. In fact, in India, other religions, like Christians can have Christian schools, Muslims can have madrasas, but Hindus cannot have their typical Gurukuls. It's not allowed anymore. We can't really preach our religion to our children. So please understand, this is the second part of genocide, which is still continuing on Hindus even in today's day and age, and we need to change this. And even the temple wealth that is supposedly ours is still not coming. So the genocide is still being enacted on us. The third is to infiltrate the institutions, to generate forces that weaken it from within. And we've seen numerous times, as Meenakshi Ji said, that they're so hungry for power that they're willing to give anything. In fact, one of these governments, these minority governments, when they came to power, they were so, I lack words in my vocabulary to even say how pathetic they were. But the Prime Minister at that time was very impressed somehow with the Pakistani Prime Minister, and he gave him all the details of all the raw officers in Pakistan, wherein they all were killed, and then the Pakistani nuclear bomb got its, was made. And what did this man get in return? What this man got in return was the highest, award of Pakistan. So we have such people who will sell us for just one award. So how do we, what do we do about that? So this is one problem that we are facing, as you rightly said. This is what is called the infiltration of institutions to generate forces that weaken it from within. Another fourth one is from, that my research on genocide said, is that Hindus, if you want to kill any civilization, you have to first dehumanize the people. Now, why do you need to dehumanize the people? You have to dehumanize people to remove the guilt of killing that person and then justifying it. So when the temples were broken, and the murtis were broken, it was justified because it said these were evil, and it is
Please be brief, huh?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we have
Sorry.
other
Sure.
yeah.
So it is to be executed, right? It is the law. It has to be executed. Now you said, what do we do? So what one needs to do, because if somebody is not an intellectual, if somebody is not writing books, what I suggest to you is that you buy as many books as you can, you read it, and you circulate it, and instead of giving mithai and instead of giving flowers to people, ideally give books. Mithai and flowers are going to get consumed and finished. Not that they are bad gifts, but if you give a gift books to people, Meenakshi Ji's book, Koenraad's books, or my books or whatever, or you give them on ancient heritage, it is going to be read by somebody or the other. And the other thing that you need to do is that you need to buy these books and every day write lines
so
about these
we
books.
have other people. So Adit,
Absolutely.
Yeah, Adit, you
So
have
I
question?
hope that I've answered your
Yeah,
question. You
thank
can
you,
ask
thank
me,
you.
and
After this
my
you can-
book on Ayodhya is outside, so you can take it.
So Adit, you have question? Yeah. So you have question?
I
No.
just have a small
Yeah.
question. Actually, Dr. Koenraad Elst said that it's just not enough to bring temples back, but also bring Muslims back. So if you could
That is
elaborate on that.
story
Yeah,
of
well-
colonizing the Hindu mind.
Well, I mean, this is not a new concept. You see, the Arya Samaj started Shuddhi about 140 years ago. Nowadays, you have a lot of talk of Gharvapasi. So, you see, bring them home. That's in principle not a difficult thing to do. In practice, it might be more demanding. Though I have to say that even though I think Hindus do not direct their energy properly by making such a fuss about temples rather than reconversions, which I think is really the priority. Nevertheless, they must be doing something right. So you see, whenever Hindus spend all this time and money and energy on doing, yajnas and so on, sometimes as a skeptical Westerner, I think, you see, what a waste. But then again, you see, somehow things happen that seemingly you haven't done anything for, and that nevertheless go in your favor. And so I think that somehow, with all the good energy you generate with all these rituals, you see, somehow this makes things happen that go in your favor. And so in the case of this reconversion, well, there is a phenomenon going on at the moment, still not very much in India, but in Kerala it's already visible. But in the Arab world, you see quite a bit of apostasy from Islam. And, in the Western world, you can see it in the open. In the Arab world, it's often concealed. Like, for instance, in Sarnath, I met a Pakistani family. You see, they were coming there to all the Buddhist sites. They say, we are Buddhists, but in Pakistan, of course, we remain Muslims. And so, you see, this is a larger and larger phenomenon. So somehow, you see, even though you're not actually converting people, still they are coming back. And so that's a good development. So, I mean, it's not that you have to do everything yourself. Once in a while, just creating the right vibrations already does the job. And I want to answer to you also, still, because I hadn't really finished. I hadn't thought of two other things you can do. So one is indeed in politics what you mentioned, that the law discriminates against Hindus. So something can be done against this. Now, I don't know the Indian politicians well enough to tell you exactly what to do. I know that the Member of Parliament, Satyapal Singh, in 2018 entered a private bill for abolishing anti-Hindu discriminations in the constitution. Now, I don't know what exactly happened with that. I know that nobody did anything, certainly not the BJP, but he himself also didn't press the point, but he was rewarded with a cabinet post. Now, was this a way by the BJP leadership to shut him up or so? I don't know. I've asked him for interviews. No. So, you see, you people are far better placed to do something about this. And the second thing you can do is something that Hindus are very good at, is to have fun. You see, you go to the cinema and the next good movie, and I don't mean a very, well, what shall I say, tear-jerker like the Kashmir Files, but you see, hopefully, some movie maker has the good inspiration to make a movie about, for example, the Battle of Bahraich. You see, 1033, where Salar Masood Ghaznavi was defeated by a coalition of Hindu kings. You see, some people say, oh, we Hindus have no unity. Well, sometimes you do, and it also may have the desired effect. And it could be a very interesting movie, like one of these kings was Raja Bhoja, the philosopher king. Very interesting. You can make a really good story, and it has a happy ending.
Thank you. So, last questions for the session. Yeah.
This is about the education policy. So there is obviously a problem in history, the subject being taught in schools, and people grumble that it should change, the book should change, and So I have a proposal. I have an idea which I had 2 days ago.
Speak a little louder.
So I had an idea 2 days ago, and this is not a well thought out idea, but I just wanted to put it here to professionals and also to everybody in the room. Is the subject necessary to be taught in school at all, the history as a subject? Because most of our curriculum is a copy-paste from some other country, namely the British. So what is the need? Just drop the subject, the students will be very happy, and it does more harm than good at this point, the subject.
Is your agenda to complete the work that the Marxist historians have left unfinished? Just finish it. Finish the subject.
Thank you very much. There are many questions which are yet to be answered, and there are many battles which yet to be won. So with this note, I would like to invite Dhruv Katotji for formal vote of thanks. Dhruv Katotji.
Namaskar. After a very long time, I've spent 1 hour here, and I thought it was 1 minute. To both Koenraad and Dr. Meenakshi Jain, absolutely outstanding. I'm short of words for that. But I just wanted to, it is a vote of thanks, so generally in vote of thanks, we don't give our own opinion, but sometimes I change the law. So, Dr. Meenakshi Jain spoke of documentation. I think is one of the most important things, because somehow we seem to have lost it. We seem to have lost that construct with our history. And this is one of the projects which I think is ongoing, how to retrieve our history, because unless we get back our history, we will not get back anything else. And this history has been distorted. It hasn't been distorted today or yesterday. It has been a deliberate attempt over the past, say, 300 to 400 to 500 years, maybe even more. But it has been a deliberate attempt, and I think this is something, unless we get this right, I don't think we'll get anything else right besides this. Koenraadji, I heard him about 3 years back where you had made the same statement. I think that was before the COVID era. Now we are in the COVID times. And again, in that hall, he made this very important point, and it struck me as the most important point. And he said, don't worry about getting the masjids back. Get the people back. The masjids will come back. Now, it is such a vital point. We have to deal with people, and we have to get them back. And this leads me to my final point, which I wish to state. How do people get enslaved? When we keep talking about it, how do people get enslaved? And I think there are 3 markers. And if you look around the world and you see people, then you will understand who is enslaved partially, who is enslaved fully. And I look at 3 markers. 1, the people who have lost their history. All 3 have to work if you want to be completely enslaved. If you've lost your history, that is 1 marker that you have been enslaved. The second, have you lost your religion? So you lose your history and you lose your religion. Now, you are 66% enslaved. And then you have to be completely enslaved. then you lose your culture and your language. The three markers. And when you look at these three markers, then you look around you. You look to the country on your west. You look at Pakistan. Have they lost their history? Yes. About 1200 years ago, in Sindh, Raja Daher was defeated by a Muslim king. And in Pakistan, they revere the Muslim who defeated them, but not the king who died defending his country. That is how you lose your history. You lose your sense of balance. And it continues. You lose your religion. So you lost your history, now you lose your religion. They've given you a faith which is not intrinsically yours. And in India, if you're a Muslim, it is fine. But people tend to forget, they may be Muslims, they are not Arabs. But you tend to follow Arabic customs which are okay for the Arabs, which are not okay for this land. It is not part of our culture. That is the second aspect. And the third is your culture and your language. When this war took place, the liberation war in Bangladesh, it was fought over language. They were fighting for that one intrinsic thing, that we want to survive as a people. And they lost it. And they fought for it and they won it. And that is why that separation took place. If you lose all three, you will be enslaved, and I don't think you have a chance to come back. But if any of these three are surviving, you have a chance to get back, slowly and steadily pull back and get back to your original roots. So you look at the countries around the world, you look at Iran, you look at Pakistan, you look at anywhere else. Look at these markers. If it works, you know whether they are enslaved or whether they are free. In India, fortunately, we are not fully free, but we will be. It simply remains for me to thank you, Koenraad. Meenakshi Ji, I was absolutely fascinated by both of you, and of course, by my dear friend Sudesh. Thank you so much to the audience for coming here. To Nina, thank you so much. Her book is lying outside, and I've requested her to sign it for you should you wish to buy it. Go and buy that book. Distribute it for all the people who are saying, what can we do? This is what we can do. And I'll make a start. I'll buy two myself. Thank you so much. And from my side, please give them a very warm round of applause before we do the felicitation. For the felicitation ceremony, Aditya, please.
Thank you, Dr. Meenakshi Jain, Dr. Koenraad Elst, and Dr. Sudesh Singh for this very thought-provoking discussion. Kindly accept a small token of appreciation from the India Foundation side. I would like to invite Admiral Shekhar Sinha to kindly felicitate Dr. Koenraad Elst. I would like to invite Captain Alok Bansal to felicitate Dr. Meenakshi Jain.
Thank you so much. Thank you all of you for patiently listening, asking interesting questions and giving us food for thought. Thank you so much.
And Major General Dhruv Katoch to felicitate Dr. Sudesh Singh for wonderfully moderating this discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We come to the end of the IS Specials conversation.